Once you were old enough, what were the dark family secrets you were finally let in on? My father was married with another woman before meeting my mother. They had a daughter and my dad loved her so much his wife started going crazy jealous. My dad noticed some strange behavior she had towards the girl, and when he tried to talk to her about it, she started arguing with him. He then left with his daughter to my uncle's house. She knew my dad would left the girl with my aunt while he was at work, so she called the police and said my aunt kidnapped her child. The police came in and took the girl away from my aunt. She immediately tried to call my dad, but the woman drove back home, put poison in her daughter's milk, and forced her to drink it. When my dad arrived, he found his daughter already dead and left alone. The woman was never ever found. My dad had never had justice for his first child. Kinda sad. Then when I was born my mother didn't mind to name me after my sister. We share the same name, and that's actually how I found it out. I asked my parents about my name, and they told me the whole story. Edit, typus. Edit 2, thank you kind stranger for the award. I know this is messed up and cruel, but my family has so many messed up things going on this just seems an okay thing to happen. My dad moved on, and he's okay now. I have 4 siblings. We are all okay. This happened in Anápolis, Brazil, in the 80s, and was told in the local news. When I was around 3 to 4, my aunt and her 3 sons came and lived with us for a few weeks. One night my mom stayed up, and I found her downstairs sitting in a chair looking out the window. One day, my aunt and the boys moved and never came back. Turns out, she was going through a nasty divorce. She had the boys at the house with her while she was packing things one day, and her husband came home. He locked the boys in a room, stabbed her, and then shot himself. My mom had been staying up with a gun that night because she had seen him in our backyard earlier that night. I was told that my mother's older brother had died in an accident. He was intoxicated and got run over by a train. A whole bunch of unfortunate circumstances etc. My grandmother often mentioned it with sadness because she considered him a brilliant boy, very handy and had a hopeful career in arts. He was a teenager when he died. However, every time this story came up, my mother's face hardened and she never spoke about it herself. I could kinda sense that there was something left unsaid, but I was a kid, so I didn't really question the story. My mom finally confided in me about a year ago that she was sexually abused by her brother and that it was not an accident, but a suicide. My grandmother has no idea. My grandpa was alcohol addicted and the biggest asshole. He was a terrible father and husband. He beat my mom and my 2 uncles and my grandma. Had them terrified every time he came home from drinking somewhere. Had them hiding for hours under their bed until he finally passed out. My grandma had cancer and almost died. When she was like 40 my mom had to take care of her all by herself, and she visited her in the hospital that was like an hour away. All she ever heard from her dad aka my grandpa was that he hopes that the B*TCH just finally died. My mom was 17 at that time and also had to accomplish her apprenticeship at the same time. Most of the people in the city we lived knew who my grandpa was because he had some job that was somewhat important. IDK everyone always just recognized by my last name that he has to be my grandpa, and they all always talked about how much they liked him and how happy I have to have a grandpa like him and blah blah. People knew nothing about him. My mild-mannered Christian mother casually told me that she dated a gangster who trafficked cocaine in New York during the 80s. He bought her a brand new BMW before getting sentenced to prison for murder for 20+ years. Someone who was friends with her and her ex 4 years turned out to be an FBI informant and she barely escaped jail, had to enter a witness protection program, and moved cross-country. Here's the craziest part, he's still stalking her, has contacted her on her birthday every year for 40 years, and keeps tabs on her. My dad has no idea. I asked her why she waited so long to tell me. Like, what if she went missing? And she said, oh, honey, he's the type of person that, if he wanted to harm me, I would already be dead by now. Very comforting. My father met my mother in the Philippines when he was stationed there in the Navy. He married her there and conceived me. He went away to finish his tour of duty. My mother moved to America when she was a month away from giving birth to me. She moved in with relatives in Texas. My father's tour ended while he was in Hawaii. He met a woman there and called my mom in America, asking for a divorce. He wanted to take back his recent marriage to her, with a kid on the way, because he had a hot one-night stand. My mother was already scared, being in a new country, not knowing much English. Add to this that she was pregnant, about to give birth, and her husband was dumping her. My Texan uncle got on a plane to Hawaii, prepared to kick my father's ass. He somehow talked my father into being a man and taking responsibility for his wife and child. The fact that the fling dumped his ass surely helped. He was back by the time I was born. I learned all this when I was 11, around the time my parents got divorced. It was only the first of countless dark family secrets I would come to learn during my teenage years. Not very much a secret, but took me until I was older to understand what was happening. My mom would sometimes have us play a game called Army, which consisted of me, my mom, and my siblings army crawling around our apartment. Kind of a hide and seek style game. She would yell hit the deck randomly and we would all drop and find a hiding spot. We would giggle and giggle while my mom army crawled around looking for us. We loved the game so much. I realized a few years ago, while retelling the story, that we lived in a really terrible neighborhood, and she would yell it out when she heard gunshots outside the building. I'm assuming she was worried about stray bullets. Edit. I shared everyone's amazing comments with my mom, and she shed a tear. She feels very appreciated on International Women's Day today. When I was young I thought it was really nice that my nana lived with my aunt and her family, since she was getting on a bit, and it meant she was looked after and there were always people around. Aunt has 6 kids. Occasionally aunt would gripe about being the one looking after nana, since aunt is also one of many kids, and being young I sympathized, but given they all spent loads of time with nana too, didn't think it was a big deal. You don't think about financial responsibility when you're young, I think, just social and caring. Well, it turns out the reason nana lives with aunt is because aunt and her husband convinced nana to put the house in their name so they could look after her affairs, and sold it out from under her and invested the money in a pyramid scheme, so it's gone now. Because of this her siblings refuse to give aunt a penny towards looking after nana, since it's her fault nana has no money or assets, and instead pay to take nana out all the time, meals, shopping, activities, so she doesn't go without, but they let aunt struggle under the weight of nana's general living expenses. Aunt's kids are all independent now, so they are not going to be impacted by money problems. Now I look back at her griping with annoyance and think what a terrible person she is. Not so much letting on, as we found out by accident, but apparently my dad's first love and him got into a serious car crash when he was 25 and she died. He lived with her father 4 years after her death. He still occasionally comes to visit my dad, even 30 years later. We were always told he was a mentor, until my sister pressed my mom on the subject. One of my sisters is even named after the girl that died, middle name, and we never even knew about her until last year. None of us have ever brought it up with him. I was in senior year of high school when I was told about the family tragedy by my grandparents. My grandfather's brother murdered his wife. She was trying to divorce him and he snapped. He went to jail and their son, my dad's cousin, was alone. He was in middle/high school. My grandparents convinced the deceased mother's side of the family to let them finish raising him and were able to get him back on a good path after the trauma he suffered. He has grown up into an absolutely wonderful man with a wonderful family and I love him. Not me, but a family friend passed away last year. We met because our daughters did karate together. I was friends with both him and his wife, still friends with his wife. He was already in his 70s when we met. His wife is about 20 years younger than him. He had a fascinating life story and I wanted to record it for his daughter. She was going through some difficult times as a young teen. She acted very badly towards him and I felt, based on my own difficult teenage years and experiences with my dad, that she might one day want to know him better, especially since he was already quite old and not in great health. I felt bad that she would likely get to know her dad as an adult. So, I spent several hours with him making recordings of his stories from his life. It was really interesting. After he passed away, I sent the recordings in USB drives to his wife. She got back to me and said they just threw them away. It came out that he had molested his daughter. I felt absolutely gut punched and so angry at this old guy who was funny and bit ornery.